Your scans are clear, your blood work is perfect, your doctor says you're in remission. So why does your gut still hurt? Hi, I'm Kate, and today we're talking about something that confuses and frustrates so many people with Crohn's. Persistent symptoms, even when all the medical markers say you're doing great. Now, this matters because without understanding what's actually happening, you can end up second-guessing your treatment, adding medications you don't need, or spiraling into restrictive eating that makes everything worse. My son actually went through this exact thing about 18 months into remission. His scans were clean, his fecal calprotectin was beautiful, his GI was thrilled, but he was still getting cramping and urgency, especially in the morning, and he was terrified that his Crohn's was coming back. Now, I see this pattern all the time. Someone finally gets to remission after months or years of active disease, and then they're left with this confusing situation where their body still doesn't feel right, but all the tests say they're fine. And here's what makes it even harder. Nobody actually prepared them for this possibility. They thought remission meant symptom-free. They thought that when symptoms persist, they assume that the tests are wrong, or they're somehow failing at remission, or they need to do something more extreme with their diet or their supplementation. But here's what's actually happening for about 1 in 5 people with Crohn's in remission. When you've had chronic inflammation in your digestive system, even after that inflammation resolves, your gut can develop what we call functional changes. The nerves become more sensitive, the motility pattern gets disrupted, the communication between your gut and your brain gets a bit scrambled. Now, it isn't active Crohn's disease. It's more like IBS-type symptoms that develop and overlap with your Crohn's. The research on this is actually pretty clear. Studies show that between 20 and 40% of people with inflammatory bowel disease in remission still have significant GI symptoms. And when they investigate, there's no active inflammation driving those symptoms. It's not in your head. This is not your Crohn's flaring, and this is not something you caused by eating the wrong thing. What it is a separate issue that needs a different approach than treating active inflammation. And that's actually good news, because once you understand what you're dealing with, there are practical things that you can do that will actually help. So let's talk about the middle path approach to managing persistent symptoms in remission. I'm going to give you 4 clear steps. Step 1, confirm that you're actually in remission. I know this seems obvious, but it's a foundation for everything else. You need objective evidence, not just how you feel, that your Crohn's inflammation is controlled. That means recent scans or scope results, and ideally a fecal calprotectin test within the last few months. Now, why does this matter? Well, if you start treating this like a functional issue when you actually have low-grade inflammation, you'll miss a real problem. And if you start adding medications or changing your Crohn's treatment when the inflammation is already controlled, you're solving the wrong problem. My son's GI did a calprotectin test and a scope when his symptoms persisted, and that confirmation that everything was truly quiet gave us the confidence to look at this differently. So step 2, map your actual symptoms without the Crohn's lens. Here's what I mean. When you've lived with active Crohn's, every twinge makes you think, Blair. But functional gut symptoms have different patterns. Get specific for 2 weeks. What time of day do symptoms happen? What makes them better or worse? Are they related to stress, sleep, your cycle, specific foods, or how fast you eat? Do you notice them more on work days versus the weekends? You're looking for patterns, not just pain. For my son, we noticed his symptoms were almost always in the morning, usually when he was rushing or anxious about something, and they'd settle once he was at school and distracted. That's a totally different pattern than his Crohn's flares, which were consistent throughout the day and got worse with eating. This tracking isn't about obsessing, it's about getting clarity so you know what you're actually working with. Step 3, work with the gut-brain connection, not against it. This is where a lot of people get stuck because they think gut-brain connection means it's psychological and they feel dismissed, but that's not what this is. Your gut has more nerve cells than your spinal cord. When you've had chronic inflammation, those nerves can stay hypersensitive even after the inflammation is gone. They're kind of like a smoke alarm that's become too sensitive. It goes off when you've burnt toast, not just when there's an actual fire. And you all know what I mean. So what helps? Things that calm the nervous system can help calm the gut. Eating in a relaxed state, not standing at the counter or scrolling on your phone, taking 3 deep breaths before meals, getting consistent sleep, moving your body in ways that feel good, not punishing you. These aren't woo-woo suggestions, they're evidence-based interventions for functional gut symptoms. My son started doing 10 minutes of slow breathing in the morning before school, and it made a noticeable difference. Not because his Crohn's changed, his Crohn's was already quiet, but because his nervous system settled. Now, step 4. Adjust food strategically, not desperately. Here's where people often go off the rails. They're in remission, but they're still symptomatic. So they start cutting out more and more foods, trying to find the trigger. And they end up with a diet so restricted, they're anxious every meal. In remission, you're not trying to control inflammation with food anymore. You're trying to support comfortable digestion. That's a completely different goal, and it needs a completely different approach. Common functional triggers are different than inflammatory triggers. Things like high FODMAP foods, caffeine, large fatty meals, eating too fast, or too much raw fiber at once can drive functional symptoms, even when they wouldn't trigger a Crohn's flare. The approach is gentle experimentation, not elimination. You might notice that a big salad gives you cramping, but cooked veggies are fine. Or that coffee on an empty stomach doesn't work, but coffee with food is okay. You're fine-tuning for comfort, not trying to be perfect. And here's the thing, it's not forever. Functional gut symptoms often improve over time as your system continues to heal and settle. So even if you need to modify things now, that doesn't mean you're locked into restrictions forever. One more thing that fits here. Work with a dietitian who understands IBD if you can. Not someone who's going to put you on a super restrictive protocol, but someone who can help you identify your actual patterns and expand your diet safely. This is exactly what we do in the Crohn's method, and it makes such a difference to have that guidance. So here's where you end up if you follow this approach. You stay on the treatment that got you into remission because that's what was working. You don't add medications you don't need because you understand what's driving your symptoms. And you don't spiral into food fear because you're making targeted adjustments based on real patterns, not panic. You get to live in remission, actually live in it, instead of constantly wondering if it's real. My son is 3 years into remission now, and those functional symptoms settled over time. He still pays attention to stress and sleeping, and also eating in a calm state, but he's not restricted. And he's not afraid. He trusts his body again, and that's what I want for you. So if this helped, share it with someone who needs to hear it, especially if they're in remission but still struggling with symptoms and feeling confused about what to do. If you want structured support for this exact situation, well, that's what we do in the Crohn's method. We help you navigate remission with confidence, not fear. If you found this useful, let me know in the comments what clicked for you, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a beautiful day.